Because if you don't ask it, the answer is going to be no. So I tell my clients, look, if there's that 1% chance that you can get it, ask for it. It's really about understanding all of your rights and responsibilities and realizing that you are not powerless in this relationship, that you do have rights. And if the franchisor does mess up, you can do this or that. It's great that you can ask it to them in person then and see how they respond.
Right.
And whether or not they're making eye contact, whether or not you think they're being truthful, because you need to make sure that you are partnering up with the right person that's a good fit for you.
Welcome to the Franchise Freedom Podcast, where you can escape the corporate trap through franchise ownership. Here's your host, Giuseppe Grammatico, the Franchise Guide.
Welcome to the Franchise Freedom Podcast. I'm your host, Giuseppe Grammatico, your franchise guide, the show where we help corporate executives experience time and financial freedom via franchising. Thanks for joining us today. We have a very special guest. I think you guys got sick of just seeing me. So we brought on today a good friend of mine, Kit Higgs from Kit Franchise Law. Kit, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thank you, Giuseppe. Great. Happy to be here.
We spoke a while back. I've been meaning to bring you on as the franchise attorney expert, and we've been getting a lot of questions on this topic. Thanks again for joining us. If you could give the audience a little bit of background of who Kit is, how you got into this field, we'd love to hear that.
Sure. So somewhat of a little windy story here, but I was working as a prosecutor in child abuse and juvenile delinquency. And my phone started blowing up. I was actually in trial and I got 3 phone calls in a row thinking it was an emergency. And so I stepped out of court, called this guy back. It was Todd Kirby. I'm not sure do you know Todd Kirby at all?
Sounds familiar.
Yeah. So one of my buddies, and he started a franchise sales organization called St. Gregory Development.
Yep. Okay.
And needed a lawyer. And so he said, "Hey, Kit, want to hire you?" And I was thinking, my gosh, I thought somebody was in a car wreck or something was seriously wrong. So I said, "Hey, man, I'll talk to you later on this afternoon, what have you." Talked to him later on. He said, "Hey, look, I want to hire you to be our lawyer." And I knew nothing about franchise law. I was a prosecutor in child abuse. Switching over would be a huge change. And so I said, no, I turned him down. I would have loved to work with friends, but I said, I don't know this area of law and I can't provide you advice on it. Well, later on, I talked to a friend's father who was a mentor and over beers. And he said, "Kit, franchise law is one of those areas where you really got to get your hands dirty to learn it. There aren't too many law schools that actually teach franchise law. So go try it out and see if it works." And that's what I did. Best decision I ever made. So I first started working out, just making sure that when I took this role, that the sales guys at STG weren't overselling, that they were following the FTC rules and regulations on franchise sales. What really learned franchise law was when one of the partners decided, you know what? There's a void in the marketplace right now in franchising. There's nobody doing indoor cycling. And so we created this concept called Cycle Bar. And my first role as general counsel was to write the franchise disclosure document and franchise agreement. Same documents that I review now, right. I actually had to write. And of course, I didn't write this myself. At the time, we used this law firm out of Chicago, one of the best law firms out there, and they helped me write it. And I needed to know everything about this. I had 100 questions back. You know, how do you come up with a royalty rate? What are the positives and negatives if you do this or that with the territory size? I needed to make sure I knew everything because at the end of the day, I knew that my name was going to be on this document. Right. It would look pretty bad if a franchisee were to call me up and say, "Hey, Kit, I'm considering buying your franchise. Maybe this is a candidate. I want to know what section 13.4 means." And if I were to say, "Geez, I don't know, let's talk to our lawyers," that would look really bad. So I needed to make sure I understood everything about it. And so then once we got the documents issued, I was taking what I learned and implementing those terms and seeing what works and what doesn't, and then refining it. And each year revising the documents and really understanding this is a living, breathing document that should be changed year to year. It needs to be, obviously. The FTC requires it. But, you know, you've got some changes to the system you need to make sure franchisees are aware of. The whole point of the disclosure document is to disclose important information to give buyers a good understanding of what they're buying into before they're locked into a contract.
Right.
So that's how I got started really understanding the franchise agreement and franchise disclosure document. Then we had franchise open operating. It was figuring out what works. And then once the company got bought out, they were about to go public is when I decided to start my own firm. And since then, I've just been representing franchisees doing FDD reviews. So I've done several hundred in the last year. I'll do more than a few hundred this year. And so I've got experience there so I can tell you what's normal and what's not. And I think I bring a lot of value when I provide my reviews.
Right. Yeah. I mean, the industry of franchising, it's a business in and of itself. When you're doing the review, you really need someone that has a background in franchising that really understands franchise law, especially when you're not sure, is this normal wording in an FDD, correct?
Absolutely. I get people all the time asking, hey, is this normal? Is this not? I just did a review yesterday. The royalty rate was 40%.
Wow. Never heard of that.
Yeah, but it makes sense for this system. And so I was telling the franchisee, look, this is the highest royalty rate I've seen, but it makes sense for this business model.
Right.
And so I'm comparing and looking at all these other business models and seeing what is industry standard. And if there's an outlier, it doesn't necessarily mean it's bad. The franchisor could be really innovative. They could be doing something a little bit different. And I think that's a great thing. If you investigate and dig a little deeper and find out, does this actually work?
I agree. I always, when someone had looked and I think it was over 20%. And I said, well, that's definitely higher than what we normally see. But the better question is not, is this too high? It's, what am I getting for that royalty? You have to make sure it makes sense, especially if they're taking a lot of the stuff off your plate, or now you don't need an office or an assistant or bookkeeper, because maybe bookkeeping is bundled in there. You want to really see what's included and validate, talking with the franchisees, making sure that they've been happy with the services and the support from the franchisor. Yeah, I get questions a lot, and I am not an attorney. I'll be first to admit that. And is this normal wording? Is this normal? And I always refer back to the attorneys, because there is some wording. I'm not an attorney, and I don't understand specifically what it means, or it sounds like the franchisor may not be able to. Are they competing with me? Are they not? I don't understand what this looks like. I always tell people to speak with a professional in that space. And if you disagree, this is a good conversation, because I want to make sure I understand this correctly. But when the point of reviewing this franchise disclosure document, which, by the way, for everyone listening in, if you haven't listened to past episodes, the franchise agreement is contained within the FDD. So you hear all these terms, but the franchise disclosure document is the complete document. The franchise agreement is in that document. But, people will say, well, that document really is written in stone. So why do I need a franchise attorney? It is what it is. But my understanding is, number one, you're doing it for the review, for the peace of mind in there, making sure that there aren't any red flags, and maybe even potentially, I know there's a couple of questions built in here, but potentially maybe there is some type of negotiation or wiggle room. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Sure, absolutely. Now, most franchisors are going to take the stance that there's nothing negotiable in the documents. And I understand that, because that's how I dealt with things. When I was general counsel of Cycle Bar, I wouldn't change anything, but it provided an opportunity for me to explain why we've got it in there. And so if there's an area that I think you could potentially ask the franchisor to make a change, I say ask it. And so the ask is twofold, or it's important for two reasons. For one, if they say yes, great. They will write up the addendum or the amendment, and they'll send it to you. And then you just send it to me, and I'll review it and say, it says exactly what it's supposed to. And there you go. But the other reason why you should ask it is so it does provide that opportunity for a franchisor to explain why they've got it in there. A liquidated damages clause. When you take a look at that, candidates say, oh my gosh, there's a liquidated damages clause in here. Well, yeah, there's a reason why there's one in there. Have the franchisor explain it. If they can't explain it, I don't know, maybe it shouldn't be in there.
Agreed. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And I mean, the document's written in simple enough terms, but for someone to get through the document, not saying they understand all the law, but it's written, I forget at what grade level, but it's simple enough that everyone should be able at least to read through it, maybe not understand it completely, but it's not an overly complicated deed, if I understood correctly.
Correct. It's just dense. When it's a lot of pages.
Yeah.
I tell a lot of my clients, look, I'm like the Cliff Notes version, the yellow and black documents you used to use in middle school and high school. I will go through the documents and raise issues that you weren't aware of, because you may be focused in on an area that you think it's worrisome to you, but in reality, it really shouldn't be where you're focusing your time. You should be worried about another area. So I explain, hey, look, maybe you should be looking at this when you've spent most of your time looking at that.
Okay, that makes sense. I always tell people, will say, well, the franchise agreement seems to be written in the favor of the franchisor. And I take a step back and say, you are right. It's written in the favor of the franchisor, but really it's written in the favor of the brand itself, because at the end of the day, they want all franchisees presenting themselves the same way, the same brand, the same service, the colors, the fonts, to all the details, so that they're not making special arrangements. Well, we're going to treat you this way, and then all of a sudden treat someone else a different way, or give them all these exceptions. And ultimately, they want to keep it universal. They want to keep everything fair, everything the same. But on occasion, maybe there is some wiggle room. I don't know if you can even talk about that, but I'd say, what would be an example of maybe a negotiation or a change in an agreement, if any?
Well, first, you brought up a good point. And most of my clients, when they're looking at the franchise disclosure document, the franchise agreement, they see, oh my gosh, the franchisor can do a lot. There's a lot of franchisor may do this, may do that. Well, first they've got to understand that this document is good for the next 10 years, most likely. Most franchisors have 10-year terms. They're occasionally 5-year terms, and sometimes even 7. But 10 is the most common. So this document has to be able to survive all the changes in economic conditions with competitors and with building a system. Maybe they've got 10 franchises now, but they'll have 200 in 2 years. And so this document's got to be able to deal with all that change. And so you want to have good lawyers drafting these documents that are going to protect the franchisor. And then it's also going to protect you, the franchisee. And so there are a lot of ways that you can see actual fairness in the documents. One of the areas is a prevailing party provision. Anytime I see a prevailing party provision, that means basically that the franchisors agreed, whoever wins in a lawsuit, if we've got a dispute and it comes to blows and we either have to go to arbitration or litigation, if there's a prevailing party provision, it says whoever wins gets their legal fees paid for by the losing party. And when I see that, I think, wow, that's really good, because if the worst case scenario does occur, if you're actually right and you proceed, that you will have your legal fees paid for. So you're not out anything. And it causes both parties really to come to the negotiations table before they spend a lot of money and time going down the path of litigation. So that's one area where I see actually more fairness brought into this. Now, you mentioned originally, do franchisors, are they willing to make changes to documents? Yeah, occasionally they are. And I can't predict when they will do that, because it's dependent upon a variety of factors. They may say, well, we really love this franchisee, so we'll be willing to bend the rules a little bit for them and provide them maybe a right of first refusal on an adjacent territory.
Right.
Or maybe give them the opportunity to expand for a cheaper price, maybe give them a discount. And again, if they are willing to do that, they will write it up and then send it to you, the candidate, and then you can send it to me and I'll review it. But most of the time, franchisors really don't change a whole lot. My review isn't about going through and redlining the documents and sending you 50 pages of changes that we'd want to make. The franchisor would just take a look at that and say, well, no, we don't make any changes. Your lawyer just spent $15,000, or you just $15,000 in legal fees for no reason. It's really about understanding all of your rights and responsibilities and realizing that you are not powerless in this relationship, that you do have rights. And if the franchisor does mess up, you can do this or that. It's really about understanding what you're buying into, because it's a 10-year contract.
Given the length of time, it's very important to review it. Even if you're working with someone, review the document, go through it a couple times, cover to cover, make sure you understand it. Mark your own notes there. I think that's something I recommend to everyone. And the biggest piece of advice here is get everything in writing. So if you are discussing something and someone says, yeah, we could do that, or we can arrange that. Maybe it's, we had someone that needed an extension for personal reasons. They couldn't meet the 6 months and it was a pretty good reason, and we'll extend it. I go, just get everything in writing. Let's just play it safe. It's not that people forget, maybe employees leave within the organization. So it's always a safe bet. One question that came up, and maybe this is case by case, but you sign a franchise agreement, do the review, you move forward, you're 5 years into a 10-year agreement, and then you go to sell. Obviously, you have the ability to sell the agreement. You don't have to stay the whole 10 years, and you could sell it to someone else. When that buyer purchases the franchise, are they really continuing your franchise agreement, or are they usually signing a brand new franchise agreement 10 years? I guess, what is normal in that case?
Well, that's a great question to ask. And it's a great question to ask the franchisor, because it is dependent upon the situation. When I was at Cycle Bar, if you were selling a franchise and you've got maybe 6 years left on the term, so you're in year 4, the incoming buyer, we would love to have on a 10-year term. So what we would do is transfer over the remaining term, so that the document itself, that franchise transfers over, and then you sign that franchise agreement, the transfer assignment agreement, and then we reissue a new agreement with a 10-year term. Now, there are situations though where you have a franchise, let's say, that signed in 2020 and with a 7% royalty. And in 2021, the royalty went up to 10%. And so in those situations, you can work with the franchisee, the franchisor say, maybe we'll grant you the right to have that old royalty for the next 3 years. And then after that, you'll switch over to this other royalty. Certainly tweaks and changes you can make to it. But franchisors generally want you to be on a longer franchise term. They don't want you to buy a franchise and then you're out for 2 years.
Ultimately, when you're looking at a resale, you're looking at both franchise agreements, right? You're investigating the franchisor. Maybe you want to go out and start in a new territory. You're comparing that to the resale. So you're kind of doing double the due diligence, making sure you have the whole picture. Ultimately, you're going to be with the franchisor. So you want to make sure the fit's there for that 10-year agreement. Question I get too on, this is actually one that's been coming up for some reason a little bit more often, is what is included, and I'm going to dive a little bit deeper, what's included in the franchise disclosure document to give you a little bit more context. Every year, we're in refiling season. So every year in the US, they'll renew the agreement. It'll have last year's information. So the new FDDs coming out will have the 2024 data in that agreement. But specifically, I get questions like, well, okay, they're giving us a financial representation. They're giving it, which is an item 19 or an item 7. They're giving us a range in investment. What is normally included? Is that every single franchisee in the system? Does a franchisee have to be a franchisee for a certain length of time? I guess those are the questions I get just because it is only being updated once a year.
Item 19 generally is going to have financial performance representations spanning a full year.
Okay.
And with emerging brands, you may not have a full year of financials to disclose. And that's really been done on a case-by-case basis, that the franchise lawyers or the franchisor's lawyers will decide what is appropriate in that context.
Okay.
I've seen some where they include just 6 months of data, and that's all they've got.
Mm-hmm.
And with proper disclosure, though, you can say, look, this is all we have. These are the 2 corporate-owned locations. These are the data. This is the data, and that's it.
Right.
And some in that situation will say, well, we only have 6 months. We don't have a full year. Let's just not disclose this year. Let's disclose when we actually do have a full year.
Okay.
So it really is dependent upon the franchisor's advice.
Perfect. Ultimately, what I advise is if you want some additional information, that is where the validation and the franchise validation calls, which is speaking with the existing franchisees. You may have someone that maybe was a few months in, but we're now in April. So they have three complete months of this year. And maybe it's not included in the FDD, but you can ask them like, hey, how are things going Q1 of 2025? Was the investment in line? What are your numbers looking like? So you can absolutely speak with franchisees. So it's a combination. It's the agreement. You can obviously learn a little bit more on the validation calls. And what I will also say in a comment I get is, although the items are the same in the agreements, the way the information is kind of presented is different. I've seen FDDs that have profit loss of every franchisee. I've had FDDs, item 19, that's completely blank because maybe they are newer or the model has changed and they want to give it time to reflect. And I have others where it's a paragraph. So there's no real, it's my understanding, it has to state the numbers in a certain way. Is that correct?
Correct. It just can't be misleading. I've seen some that basically look like they were ripped off of the internet, that somebody, a bot from AI did it. They bought the franchise disclosure document from LegalZoom. And then others, they've hired these artisanal craftsmen who they put pictures and it looks like a painter created it. You want to just see the reason or the information be presented in a way that's not misleading. It's very easy to understand. Average, median, highs, lows, disclosing when the locations opened up, I think is critical to have that. And then depending upon what type of business it is, you're seeing how they break down the revenue,
right,
and where that's coming from and how often. So you get a better sense of what you could potentially earn. And of course, they're going to have a disclaimer in there. Some outlets have earned this much. Your individual results may differ, but at least you'll get a sense of what is potentially achievable here. And the best item 19s that I see are ones where I see the franchisee doing better than the corporate locations. And that's when I'm like, wow, it shows that the model works here.
Right.
They're doing better than the ones that you've owned and operated for the last 10 years.
Absolutely. I mean, they factor everything in, the royalties, but you want to see that. You want to see the franchisees doing better as they grow because they're just focusing on that one business. The franchisor has their location or their territory. They're running the franchise. They have a lot of stuff going on. And all that information is really gathered. That's direct input, even going to the investment, the item 7, which is the investment range. It's all inputs, right? At end of the year, they're gathering information from the franchisees. Maybe they are able to import directly from QuickBooks or whatever their accounting system is, but they're gathering that information because sometimes you'll see some ranges, 100 to 300,000. Well, that's a big swing. And there's a lot of variables. Obviously, if you're buying, leasing equipment or have a manager in place or running it full time, but that is all, this information is not made up. These aren't just estimates. This is what we think. It's give us your data. They put it all together and they have these ranges, correct? Am I correct by that? Okay.
Yep. And that's what they'll typically risk in the first couple of pages of the FDD. They'll talk about general risks when buying a franchise. And then the next page after that is special risks. And if a franchisor is emerging, they'll put in there that this is riskier, or potentially riskier investment. It has a short operating history. And I'll explain to my clients, yeah, it's because item 7 and item 19. If they don't have a whole lot of franchisees open and operating, they'll have all these other data sets.
Right.
Now, if they had 1,000 locations open, well, those 1,000 locations, they're going to be using that data to figure out what their item 7 ranges are. The data is going to be really solid. Item 19, they're going to show data from 1,000 locations. So it's an emerging brands. You've got to look at, all right, well, here's all the information we've got. And do I have enough to actually make that informed decision? Some will say, yeah, maybe I should wait until the next year's FDD, especially right now. But, the franchisor will tell you, hey, maybe the royalty rate's going up. You may want to sign under this version now because the next one will change. It's very dependent upon that situation.
And depending how long it takes for the refile and getting the new FDD, that territory may not be available.
Or the territories for some of these that are selling like hotcakes, a territory could be gone by that time.
Any other, there's all the parts are equally as important, and then I want to go into kind of your process and things like that. But when reviewing the FDD standouts, there's so many different sections, such as there's a legal section, right? If have been any lawsuits, can you talk to us a little bit about maybe a general overview? And then I want to go into your full process of areas to really think about or focus on, considering the whole document is equally as important.
Sure. Well, you mentioned litigation and item 3. And when I have candidates that see in an FDD litigation, they tend to get a little scared. Oh my gosh, the franchisor is sued. And I take a look at every case that's listed. If they file arbitration, it's all private. So I don't know what happened. But if they file in state or federal court, I can typically see what occurred. Most of the time, it's just run-of-the-mill stuff, a dispute that you have with a franchisee. And there's really not a whole lot there. But if you see a lot of them, that then is an issue. And then you look at item 20. So you see a lot of litigation in item 3, maybe 3 to 5 cases. And then you go to item 20 where it shows us the outlets. And you go to the transfer section and you see that they had 20 transfers last year and they had 30 terminations. Well, that may indicate that the franchisor is having a little bit of a crisis. And maybe they've got a new executive leadership team that is taking a really hard stance on maybe minimum performance guarantees and saying, all right, we need to clean house. So there's a lot to look at. And it's not necessarily looking at one individual portion or item of the FDD. It's looking at it in combination with the others. So if there is lawsuits listed, item 3, then I go to item 20. I'll look at trademarks, item 13. That's not something that people typically look at, but I want to see what potential revenue streams they're going to add on. So maybe they filed other trademarks that they want to have. Also make sure that they own the trademark. When you buy a franchise, you're getting the rights to use the mark and the system in the territory. So you want to make sure that your trademark, you actually have the right to use it. And occasionally I've seen some issues with that. It's more of an administrative side where a different entity actually owns it and they have it listed in the FDD. But it's just making sure you've got the whole thing here. And I want to check and make sure everything lines up with what they're telling you.
Love it. It's a very important document. What I advise people on, and then I want to go into kind of the process is Number one, a franchisor will give you the FDD at different points in time. It may be on the intro call. It may be on the second call. The document is extremely important, but you want to make sure the franchise at the end of the day is a good fit. It's a legal document. It's not the most exciting document, but it is extremely important to review. So what I tell everyone is make sure the fit's there. It may take you a couple calls. You dive into the agreement, and then look into, as you move further along, maybe you narrow it down to one or two brands, or maybe it is that one brand, and doing that review. Now, the review you can do on your own. I always recommend looking into speaking with a franchise attorney, specifically, as we mentioned, a franchise attorney, not your friend who practices law that knows nothing about franchising. So it's always a good idea. It is an investment, but it's going to be a thorough review. It's going to give you kind of that peace of mind. It's going to answer all those lingering questions in the back of your mind. Is this normal wording? What do I do in this case? Can we do an addendum and that kind of deal? Highly recommend it. And this is done later on in the process. You want to make sure there's a fit. You had a chance to review it. And then as you kind of maybe start off with 3 or 4 brands and narrow it down, that's when you hire someone like Kit to do that review for you. So with that being said, give the audience maybe what is your process, length of time, and anything else, I guess, what to expect when working with you.
Sure. So I'm typically the last part of due diligence. It's when a candidate is ready to move forward and they're either about to go to discovery day or confirmation day, or they've just returned.
Right.
And I generally recommend that you do the review before you go to discovery day, so that you're armed with questions that you can ask them in person. Because my review is going to reveal a lot of hard-hitting questions that you want to ask the franchisor. And it's great that you can ask it to them in person then and see how they respond.
Right.
And whether or not they're making eye contact, whether or not you think they're being truthful, because you need to make sure that you are partnering up with the right person that's a good fit for you. So I generally recommend you do the review. All right, well, I'm not sure that I'm 90% there. I want to get to 95%, and then I'll do the review. That's fine too. Either way, before or after, it's generally right around that time.
Right.
So my review is fairly simple. It's 3 steps, really. I've got an intro call, 15 minutes over Zoom, where I want to learn more about the candidate and what they're looking at, what franchise they're looking at buying, why are you buying it? Who else is involved here? Because I want to make sure that they're also part of the conversation. Is it your wife, your brother, your sister, your mom, or your dad? Have them also in the call. So first call is just getting to know them and explaining my process, what I do. Second step is I send them the engagement letter. It'll list my flat fee in there. My flat fee to review one franchise is $2,395. And to review the purchase of multiples is $2,895. So I send my engagement letter, list the flat fees in there. All the candidate does, which is by this time, it really is now my client, they electronically sign it and send me back the FDD. Then I do my homework, and then we have the review call. The review call is an hour and a half over Zoom, where I share my screen, and I have the Zoom AI bots enabled too. So I send a note summary afterwards showing everything that we talked about. And so then we go through the document, literally cover to cover, pointing areas I like, areas I don't like, areas that are unusual in a good way or bad way, questions to ask the franchisor, areas of liability and all of that. And at the end of the day, then the franchisee candidate should have an amazing understanding of what's actually in the document. It shouldn't be as intimidating as it was beforehand.
Right. Which it is. It could be an intimidating document if you've never read one before, and then you start reading others, and they all have the same setup for the most part. No, it's awesome. It's very inclusive. As I mentioned, it answers a lot of the questions and kind of clears up certain sections, because I've read quite a few agreements, and sometimes I don't know what some of the sections mean, or I have to kind of go back and forth. If there are additional questions come up or based off the responses, there is going to be some back and forth, correct? So you may have 5 questions. They come back with responses. Is it more of you communicating through the franchisee?
Yes.
Do you speak with the attorneys on the other side? Does that happen often?
Most of the time, it's the franchisee talking to the franchisor. I think life would be a lot less complicated if lawyers weren't the ones that were talking. The lawyer should be there to formalize things and make sure that whatever agreement was made actually is. So I tell my clients, go ask the franchisor directly. They'll provide responses. And sure, you can run those responses by me, because they want to know oh, wait, they said, yeah, they agreed with you, Kit, but they said this. Is that correct?
Right.
Oh, yeah, it is. Absolutely. Feel free to go ahead.
Okay.
Just getting assurances, because this is most of the time, these are my clients' first time buying into a franchise or buying a business. So they have no idea what to expect. And so they just want assurances. They want to know, is this something I should be doing?
Right. I love that. That's great. And I like the idea that you're focusing on this area, because in the past, people that are in kind of same position, franchise attorneys, they also had clients. So there was a conflict if they were working with a certain franchisor, and it's like you had to check, what's your current client list? Can you do an FDD review for this specific brand? So it really simplifies things. Flat fee, it eliminates, well, should I ask this question? Am I going to get charged? So this way, it's kind of all inclusive. It's peace of mind. And again, it's done towards that end of the process. Anything we didn't talk about, these are most of the listeners. We polled the listeners, a majority are first time. We do have some people that own a franchise, maybe looking at additional, but there's a lot of corporate executives that are looking to invest in their first franchise. So any other advice you'd like to give the audience?
Well, it's never too late to engage an attorney. I'll typically have clients that'll call me up, and maybe it's the day before they go to confirmation day, or even a night before they sign the franchise agreement. Call me in a panic. Hey, I didn't get a review done. Is there any way you can help me? And if I can, I will. I'll move heaven and earth to try to squeeze them in, because I know it's a scary time, but it should also be an exciting time. And you always have to remind them of that. Look, you're making this change for a reason. You've done everything you need to do, but now you just need to dot the I and cross the T's. And that's where I come in and say, yeah, everything looks great. Or, hey, maybe just ask these last few questions, and then all of your fears, or most of the fears, really will kind of be washed away, so that you can feel confident moving forward. Because the last thing you want is a hesitant or reluctant buyer.
Right.
Because if they feel like they are pushed in, well, then 3 months down the road, they may think, oh my gosh, maybe I shouldn't have done that. No, they should feel confident. I made the right decision. I did everything that I needed to do before I bought into this. And I'm just going to move forward and kick ass and take names.
Right. That's why I encourage people, if you have questions, bring it up with the franchisor, bring it up with you on the legal side, bring up those questions, jot them down, because you'll forget. And I have them kind of keep running tabs, each brand, questions, concerns, pending, all that kind of stuff, because you want to get it out of your head, because it could be an overwhelming process, especially when you're searching in the very beginning stages. We're working together, but you may be talking with 3 different brands. It does get a little bit overwhelming if you've never done this before. Love that. I think that's some awesome and some really good advice. Fun fact, I heard you're a movie star with De Niro. Is this true?
Oh, man. Yeah. So, yeah, I was in a movie a year and a half ago, I think it was. I mean, they cut my hair super short, had to shave my face. And my role, I was the maitre d' in what was at the time called The Wise Guys.
Okay.
And Bob De Niro walks up to me because he's going to have dinner or lunch with the other character. And you see me for like, I don't know, my wife says it's like a second. It might be less than that. The camera kind of sweeps by. And I mean, if you didn't know me, you wouldn't know that was me. But it was fun as all get out. And it's amazing. That took 2 days to shoot. And you literally see it for like, it's just a flash. But
yeah, they record so much for that. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I've heard that.
Yeah, the portion of the movie's not really good.
Okay.
I was hoping that I'd be this really small part in like The Godfather, or Untouchables, like a really classic mafia movie. No, I mean, the reviews are terrible.
That's funny.
Fun. I mean, if you ever get the opportunity to be an extra, it's cool to see the way another business works and all that goes into it. It's amazing how much time and effort goes in. I mean, I was blown away. They had to shoot the scene 15 times, just him walking to me.
And cut your hair. And you had to go, yeah.
Exactly.
I love that. I was on last spring, Diners Drives, a friend of mine, Jersey Shore Barbecue here in Point Pleasant. And we went there, they recorded, we were there for about 4 or 5 hours. We watched the episode, and I think my back for a second, because they're recording, they need the extra footage. Obviously they can't come back, but it was 2 days and the show is a half an hour, but it's actually not. You take out commercials, and obviously there's 3 different restaurants. So really it was 7 minutes of footage that they took. And it's crazy how much filming and what they actually include. But no, awesome. This was fun. This was Actually, I'm going to send, this may be an email we send out just to, when people have these questions, a lot of it is not just answering those direct questions, but the expectations of the document, what to expect, why it's written in this way, the realistic expectation of changes and things like that. I think this is super helpful because at that point, I've had people say, well, I'm a negotiator. And I'm like, that's great to negotiate. You can ask, but you can't change the franchise fee. Maybe you can delay the opening. Maybe you get a zip code thrown in, but you're not changing the royalty because legally, franchisor really has to treat everyone the same. These conversations are great. And it's not just coming from me. I'm like, you're hearing it directly from Kit, a franchise attorney. So I appreciate that. This was really helpful. I really appreciate your time. I learned a lot. I got some of my personal questions that I get on a daily basis answered. And looking forward to having you back on the show. So if you think of anything else or things change in the franchise world, I'd love to have you back on just for an update, maybe changes or kind of like when the UFOC went to the FDD and some of those other changes. That's when I got involved. That's dating myself. Yeah. Keep us posted and we'll let you know when the show goes live.
Thank you. I appreciate being on here.
Absolutely. Thanks again.
All right. Goodbye.
Thanks for tuning in. If you want to learn how to make the transition from corporate to owning your franchise, join Giuseppe on the next episode. You can also follow on all social media platforms and achieve financial and time freedom today.